Welcome to the Videocraft Show. I'm Jon Santiago, your host. This podcast is presented by Video Husky, and in this episode, I speak with Jake Matthews. He's a multimedia creative based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and his commitment to his craft has landed him commercial gigs with some pretty big brands that you probably know. I'm talking Airbnb, Lululemon, Southwest Airlines, and much more. He's also very well traveled from Greece to Kenya. He's done a lot of work overseas as a photojournalist and as a videographer all over the world. And in this episode, we discuss why his curiosity fuels his creativity. We also touch on the impact of travel on his life. And we talk about how he approaches his collaborations with brands and many more subjects to come. Lock in. You're listening to the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate you for coming on and joining us on this endeavor. We're going on with this video podcast, so I'm glad to have you on as a guest, man.
Heck yeah, well, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited. I always love a good chance to talk, so this is good.
Yeah, that's what fascinated me as I was doing my research on you and trying to formulate some questions about you. It really stood out to me. On your website, you talk about curiosity and how I think it's you try to use your creativity to explore your curiosity as a photographer, as a videographer. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Where did the origins of your curiosity come from?
Yeah, so for me, creating and any type of photography, videography, any sort of creativity always feels like a very a peaceful heart reset for me. And it's it kind of allows me slow down and breathe and just take in my surroundings. And all of that comes from I actually talked about this on a video this morning, but I was with my dad years ago when I was probably 6 years old. And I was very similar to how I am now, very just energetic, spazzy sort of kid. Didn't want to slow down and pay attention to anything. Was just always running around doing my own thing. And we were in this small town called Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is bustling in the summers, just full of people everywhere. And me as a kid, I wanted to go run around. And I remember my dad stopped me that day and he said, "Here, we're going to just sit down on this bench and we're just going to people watch." And I was 5, 6 years old. I didn't even know what people watching was. But my dad told me, he's if you sit long enough, you start to realize that people are very fascinating in how they interact with each other, how they dress, just what they're doing in general. But it takes you slowing down and actually paying attention for you to start to notice those things. And ever since he told me that, I started to use that curiosity as a way for me to slow down intentionally, slow down and really start to pay attention to all the little things that would start to stand out to me about a potentially boring scene that's in front of me. But it starts to become lively because I slow down and let that curiosity run its course.
So that really seems like it laid the groundwork for you to go into this creative field of video creation, photography, the visual arts, right? Because some people, me, I've written a lot throughout my career. I've done a lot of video as well. I've done audio and podcasts like this before in the past. But it really sounds like to me that is what kind of sets you down this path to be more of a visual creative.
Yeah. And it didn't even match up initially. It was something I kind of that clicked with me later on as I was more into the visual arts, which was I was always a curious person, but more in regards just me wanting to talk to people and hearing their stories. That was where my curiosity really was. And when I first started photography, I really only started through going out and exploring and being on my natural adventures and just kind of taking photos along the way, but didn't really think of it as really satisfying my curiosity until probably about a year or two into it, when something kind of clicked with me and I was like, wait, the storytelling that I've always loved doing, this is the perfect outlet for that. So it just kind of came together and was this great transition. And yeah, somehow clicked to me just realizing that the power of my photos and the power of my videos, that it really had a chance to make an impact and to change somebody's perspective. So I just like kept diving into any sort of curiosity I had with the visual arts. But yeah.
How do you think about storytelling from a visual perspective, right? Because it's very different from when you're piecing something together in written word. I'm
Yeah.
really curious how you approach that from, in particular, creating video as your medium for telling stories.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's absolutely in everything. And it's funny because like nowadays, I feel like sometimes I'm on shoots with people, and it's because I've spent literally 7 years, quote unquote, trying to master the craft. I still am nowhere near a master by any means, but people will be with me on shoots nowadays, and they'll just be like, "Oh, you just kind of like show up and like goof off and like talk to people and have this energy," and it turns out that it comes out with this great story, and I'm like, okay, that's what you see, but there's actually so much else going on that I'm just kind of used to by now that I may not even express it while I'm on a shoot. But it's things such as how lighting plays a role, like, and that can completely change the course of a story, whether it's like a joyful story or a more moody story. That can be with lighting. Same thing with just like the speed at which you shoot something, if you're moving versus if the subject's moving, or both, to the song choice behind it. Like literally every single possible detail you can dive in, and it can genuinely alter the course of the story. It really feels like with video, I view that as like I'm writing a book with a blank canvas though, but in video form. And it's just kind of like, hey, what does every single little word look like to make the story that I want to tell? And so that involves everything from lighting to the speed of the shot to the gear that you use to location to simply just interacting with the people I'm with and making sure they're comfortable so that their story can best be told. So it's a mix of everything, honestly.
There's a lot of stuff I kind of want to touch on there to like unpack with you. I think what I want to follow up on though, in particular, is just making people feel comfortable on camera. What are
Right.
some of the things that you do when you're shooting some of those subjects to kind of get them loose, get them feeling more natural when you are shooting them for video?
Right. And so this is like, in my opinion, the number one, like most important thing to, at least to like my career. And I try to share it with other photographers and videographers as well, just like how important your ability to connect with someone is and to make them feel comfortable. Because I think a lot of times as creatives, we get so used to being with a camera and we don't realize that for quote unquote normal people, that's such a weird thing for them, and them being in front of a camera is something they're not used to and they may feel awkward in front of. So it's first off just kind of acknowledging that they may feel uncomfortable. And secondly, one thing that I do is like, I don't try to take myself too seriously. I never try to show up on a shoot and act like the most professional businessman there. Like it's nothing like that. Like I want to show up and talk to somebody like they're my friend. And oftentimes I'll find myself intentionally goofing off, acting like an idiot, solely because then they'll start laughing at me and realizing, oh, he doesn't care if he looks stupid. So like neither will I. But it's just kind of like me joining in and like putting myself in the story as well. I see so many people when they're shooting videos, they just kind of stand behind the camera and they just kind of are sitting there looking at the camera, not even making eye contact with the subject. And they're just saying, no, that's not good. Let's do it again. Like, no, let's just do it again. And I will like see the subject kind of start to go into their shell, feel more uncomfortable, feel under pressure. And for me, it's just all about remembering that at the end of the day, like you are there with another human, and that matters, and treating them like a friend and connecting with them like you would want a friend. And I think that that opens up so many doors to just simply making people feel comfortable. And once they're comfortable, then I feel like their story can truly come out and shine. But
Is this something that you learned from just experience, or was this something that you learned from other people that you worked with who were more experienced in video than you? Where did you kind of pick up on these things?
so, ironically, how I picked up on it technically really has not anything to do with video. It was more so before I was ever even a photographer, a videographer. I actually did a lot of public speaking and work kind of, and actually like in more of a ministry way, but it involved me leading, like being with small groups and connecting with people and learning how to just interact with them. And it taught me kind of at a young age to really just pay attention to people and to listen when they talked and to notice signs that they were uncomfortable or stuff like that. But it was really um, not anything that had to do with photo or video. Once again, it was just me spending so much time with people and learning how to invest in them and like learning how to like care for humans. And that transition, it was just an ironic transition, but it transitioned really well into my video work as well. But it was just, I don't know, this may dumb it down too much, but it was just learning how to be a good friend to people and like learning how to be a good brother, a good son, and what that looked like. And I think that allowed me to learn to treat other people better and therefore be able to tell their story better.
Do you come from a big household? Do you have like brothers and sisters?
I come from a large family. I have one brother, but my family's very close. Cousins, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everybody. Like we always get together for family stuff. But yeah.
I imagine maybe some of that kind of had like an influence on just making you or helping you develop into becoming like I'm, an extroverted type of guy or somebody who's good around people.
Right. It was so, well, it's funny because I tell people this and they're always so shocked, but I'm unlike anyone in my family. And I think that is why I'm the way that I am. And that my family, like literally, this can talks more than most of my family does. Like my family is the most silent people that you've ever met. And not in a bad way. They're like beautiful, peaceful, calm people. But for some reason I grew up and I was like, all right, well, somebody's got to talk at the dinner table. So from a young age, it was like I had to learn how to interact with people and like get people to start talking and telling the story of their day. But it all came from me coming from this silent family. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting, man. Yeah, I mean, some people, I mean, I consider myself more of a, I guess there's a concept of an ambivert, someone who kind of like walks
Mm-hmm.
along the lines of being both an extrovert and an introvert. Like in this situation right now that we're having, we're having this conversation. I can be very extroverted, ask a lot of questions because I'm a curious guy, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, I just love like being by myself and having those alone moments too. And I imagine something that's probably somewhat similar with you as well, especially when you're like processing a lot of your work and trying to piece it all together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, I definitely give off the vibe that I am bouncing off the walls 24/7, always full of energy, always wanting to be around people. To an extent, that's true, but there isn't definitely another side of me that people don't see, and it is the time that I spend alone, but it's very intentional and like extreme in that, like, for instance, like I'm planning on here in about what next month. Next month, I'm planning a trip to Joshua Tree National Park for a week by myself to just go out there with no technology, literally nothing except for like a pen and some paper. And I'm just going to spend my days like being by myself, walking around and writing down all of my ideas. And usually it's things like that that push any ideas that I go for in the next year or the next month, whatever. But it all comes from the time of me intentionally shutting down absolutely everything about my life. Because then my crazy mind that is always going is forced to create something new. And there we go. In that silence, like come up with this new idea. So that's definitely a huge part of it as well.
How often do you do that? Do you try to have like those kinds of solo retreats for yourself a couple times a year or
So as far as like a more like a glamorous like, oh, I'm going on a trip for a solo retreat, that's more like once a year. But I try to do it honestly every day, even if in a small version. I live in a part of my city that's very walkable. It's easy for me to take a 15-minute walk in the morning to go get some coffee, and so usually that's how I start every morning. Is I just like will walk by myself, not look at my phone, and I'll have a 30-minute walk to start the day where I'm doing nothing and simply allowing my brain to kind of start getting geared up and start coming up with ideas. But it definitely, I try to start every day like that. Yeah.
gotcha. as far as like the ideation process when you're coming up with either content for yourself or when you work with these brands, I mean, you have these moments to yourself where you're on your own and you're letting your brain kind of just move. But do you ever set aside times where you're just like, I'm just going to sit down and brainstorm a bunch of ideas for this particular video or this particular piece of content?
Oh, absolutely. The way that I do that is maybe a bit different than from what most people do. I'm not a huge, like, when it comes to professional projects, I'm not a huge, like, me think to the ideas all by myself. Like, I would much prefer that, like, to do collaborative brainstorming and to definitely hop on a call with the client, or if they live in the same city, get together for breakfast, something like that. And I will tell them at the beginning, I'm like, hey, just so you know, I'm about to share lots of ideas, and 80%, if not more, of them are going to be crap. But I'm like a big believer in just like, hey, let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. But I definitely love to always do that with somebody who is very, very much a part of the video from a professional sense. And if they're the ones hiring me, it's their video. So I like to do that with a team if possible. But yeah.
Do you ever? I imagine sometimes in those sessions, you're probably asking them questions about what they're interested in and what they're curious about as well to kind of inform your thinking for the
Oh,
project, right?
very much so. And a lot of times, like, you do get some good answers from them if you do sit there and, like, it's kind of like a weird balance, because part of me is like, all photographers and videographers out there should go into a brainstorm meeting with something prepared. Like, you should come with ideas to present, but also you don't want to go overboard and not listen either. So it's like, it's that balance of, you definitely want to come prepared, but come like being willing to like lay your ego aside and let your ideas fall away if you need to, and listen to what their ideas are as well. But at the same time, you don't want to show up with no ideas and they say, oh, we don't know, that's what you're here for, and then you kind of look like a dumbass. But so it's definitely important to come prepared, and not like do it all off the cuff, but at the same time you do want to listen.
Gotcha. Yeah, I want to touch on, where you're from or where you're located now. I'm You're from Tennessee, as you alluded to earlier. Not originally from Nashville, though.
Correct. From Memphis, Tennessee, which is a 3 hour drive south of Nashville, southwest. But I've been here in Nashville since 2012, so a good amount of time. Been loosely based out of here, but have Nashville's basically been home for a while now.
Yeah, Nashville. From what I know, I haven't been to Nashville. I actually went to Tennessee a couple years ago. I was in Chattanooga,
Oh,
visited
nice.
visited a friend there and some family who live out there too. But from what I know about Nashville, it's a very creative place. It's a very artistic place, is it not? Is that what drew you to Nashville?
No, so I mean, I grew up, like I said, in Memphis, and Memphis, while it definitely is known for being a city with a ton of music influence in itself, it is in no way like an artistic city, I would say. And I moved to Nashville, and I remember I was like so out of the loop. I didn't even know what a hipster was. Like, I got to Nashville and saw like hipster guys wearing flannels and boots and skinny jeans, and was like, what in the world? Who are they? Why do people dress like that? What are they doing? But like, had no idea about this like artistic community. Once again, like for me growing up, it was explained to me that if you wanted to be an artist, that meant that you basically were signing up to be homeless. Like, you weren't going to make any money. It wasn't a feasible like profession. And then I got to Nashville, and it was like, wait, it is like middle of the day on a weekday, and somehow it seems like none of these people are at an office job. What do these people do? And it's like, oh, they're all creative. So it is definitely a city where everyone you meet seems like it's trying to be a musician, a photographer, an influencer, an actor, whatever. But it's just like, it feels almost like an LA, where it's like it's a city that people come to try and make it these days.
That sounds like that was the moment for you where you kind of felt like, okay, I'm gonna pursue this creative life. I'm gonna try to make a living out of it per se.
Yeah, to an extent, it definitely it the Nashville ambiance, if you will, is what definitely pushed me to start doing photo video. but I was doing it for 3 or 4 years before I even thought that it might be a profession. Like it was solely for fun, a hobby, and it literally turned my profession by accident. I got out of college. I applied to be a high school teacher. Thank goodness I did not get the job. But I was sitting there like, okay, I have no money. I've been taking photos for a while, so I guess I'll try and do that. And so I just kind of started doing that, and people started booking me for shoots, slow and steady, and just kind of took off from there.
What I have to ask you, what subject would you have taught if you ended up becoming a high school teacher?
So who knows? I was probably going to be a math teacher and also a high school basketball coach. So nothing really exciting. I would have enjoyed that life for sure, but definitely like the one that I ended up with a lot more.
So what was that moment like the first time you picked up a camera? When was that for yourself?
Oh, I remember the exact day. It was like roughly, or I could go back and figure out the literal exact date on the calendar, but it was roughly like May 25th of 2013. And it was just a random day. And once again, I'd always been an adventurous person, had like to go explore around and do stuff, be on my feet. But that day I texted my buddy, his name was Warren, and I was like, hey, you want to go explore around like downtown Nashville and take some photos around the city? And the entire reason I did it was to try and impress a girl, because there was a girl who had a crush on this guy who was a photographer. And I was like, okay, I know how I'll get her to notice me. So I started taking photos solely to try and impress her. But it was that one day that I asked my buddies, like, hey, you want to come explore around downtown, take photos? For some reason, he said yes. And I mean, that day I got addicted and did it every single day for the next 3 years without making a dime. It was just something about it just clicked with me and I loved it.
What camera were you using initially when you got started?
iPhone, like an iPhone. Oh yeah, I used an iPhone for the first 3 years. It was my first camera was like a Canon Rebel T3i. I got it at a Best Buy as I was heading out on a road trip that day. Had no idea how to use it. But for the first 3 years, yeah, it was just me roaming around on my phone, editing on my phone. Like everything was just on this little bad boy.
It's almost like, you know, so many people they get, it's so interesting you bring that up because so many people get caught up in equipment and gear when in reality, you know, if you do have an iPhone, I mean, imagine if you get the new iPhone 12 now, like what kind of photos and videos you can shoot on that. But people get so obsessed when they're creating content about like I have to have like the highest end Sony or Canon or Nikon camera with this kind of lens or whatever. I mean, it's almost like a rite of passage. I feel like that you went through to be like, I just have to use. I'm gonna use this phone, and I'm gonna get really good with using the phone. And then once you did that, then it was time for you to like graduate onto like, you know, something a step higher, right? And most people don't
Oh,
seem to think about it that way when they first start.
absolutely. Well, one, it's just like there's so many aspects of photography that have nothing to do with the camera. Like I would say 95% of photography doesn't have to do with the camera. It's about composition, lighting, storytelling, the ability to make people comfortable, all that stuff. Um, and I think a lot of times, one, when you jump into getting the nice camera, that can overwhelm you and you are thinking so much about the gear that you forgot the other stuff. And then secondly, I think sometimes people use it almost as a crutch where they're like, oh, I have a nice camera and I have a lens that goes to 1.2, so I get the blurry background. So why like try to learn to get any better? Because this already looks good in their mind. And it like doesn't force people to get better. But for me, it was like, oh, I had nothing about my phone that technically gave me any advantage. Like it was like an iPhone 3 back in the day, and I was posting on Instagram, quote unquote, comparing myself to other people who are posting photos from their camera. And it was like, I have to do with an iPhone what some people are doing with the camera. And that just pushed me to really learn the aspects of photography, learn composition, learn lighting, and learn storytelling, I think. But I would definitely like recommend to everybody, like start with an iPhone. There's no point in jumping into a camera.
Yeah. all of that stuff was just self-taught then. You just kind of learned from, I imagine, just looking up stuff on the internet, but then also trial and error, as you talk about, by using the phone out and about.
Hmm.
No like formal training for yourself, right?
Oh, none at all. It was, I mean, at a minimal amount, I did some YouTube education as far as like looking at YouTube videos of how to take Instagram bangers or whatever the videos would be. But no, really, it was me once again every day going out and taking photos and then asking myself, do I think these photos are any better than the ones I took yesterday? And it was just constantly comparing one day to the day before, and no formal training, nothing like that. It was literally just being out in the field.
Gotcha. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit into something that is it's a bit related to this, but I my mind kind of works in different ways. Even though I have like my notes of of questions that I want to ask you,
Ah,
um, I want to ask you about first and foremost how Nashville in particular, living there, has influenced the way that you approach your video work, your photography. Um, and then I want to dive into, after you talk about that, I want to dive into your travels as well.
awesome. Down to talk about all of it. So Nashville, oh man, like I don't know if I've ever even thought about it like this, but now that I am, it's making me very thankful. So if I start crying, ignore it. But one thing I love about creating in Nashville is that I have been around and worked with and for so many other creatives. And the perk in working in a city full of creatives that understands the art, and also having other artists, such as a musician or something, hire you, is that they understand the power of creativity. And by creativity, what I mean is like creating something that isn't cookie cutter, trying new things, trying out new ideas. And I think people in Nashville are very open to that because they understand the importance of the artistic process. Whereas I think in some cities that I know, some friends that shoot in that maybe aren't as artistic cities, they tell me like how their clients all just want the same boring stuff. And I think it's because their clients don't know the power of bringing these new creative ideas to the table. So Nashville, it's just like, it has given me free reign. Like I feel like people trust other artists here, and you really get to play around, try new things, fail at a lot of things, and learn a lot of things along the way.
Now I want to shift and talk about the travel aspect. I'm doing my research for this. I have seen that you are a very well traveled man. Like, I've got on my list here. You've been to Slovenia, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia,
Okay.
Colombia, Hong Kong, Greece, Kenya. So many different places. Norway, Morocco, Madagascar. I feel like this is what only the tip of the iceberg in terms of
Yeah.
the places that you've been. When was the first time that you actually stepped foot outside of the country?
Outside of the country, it was when I was 15 years old. So I was a sophomore in high school in the US. And my grandparents took me and my brother to England for our spring break trip. Um, but that was my first trip. I really didn't travel a ton until later on when I studied abroad in England. And that was kind of the big Kickstarter for me. I studied abroad and I was in college in my sophomore year of college and went to probably like 15 countries over the course of 3 months and spent that time in Europe. And that's where everything started. But really, technically the first trip was 15 years old to England with grandma and grandpa.
How much has travel influenced the way that you think and approach your work as a creative person?
Number one most formative thing that I've done ever in my life is travel. And that applies to how I approach photo video, to how I approach life in general. But I mean, just so many things. Like, one, I would say the number one thing that travel has changed about me and like pushed me to create in a new way is just how important traveling made me realize just how important breaking stereotypes is. And for me, that's like the number one thing, the number one thing I want to do while I take photos or while I travel. It is to like to show people what the world is actually like. Because I ran into situations where I would tell my friends, my family, or whatever that, hey, I'm going to live in India for a month, or hey, I'm moving to Kenya for 5 months. Hey, I'm taking a trip to to China, wherever. And they would always like, I would always, almost no matter where the country was, but if it was a country where they didn't speak English or they looked a little bit different than me, then people would almost, I would almost always get a response of like, oh, are you sure you're going to be safe there? And then I would like get to China and be like, this is the safest place I've ever been. Why is it that my grandma thinks that China is a dangerous place? And just something about that really hit home with me. And it's just, it was all because traveling has given me so many wonderful experiences for with so many people all over the world that like, I could genuinely say I've had a positive experience in just about every country I've been to, which is around 55 at this point. So it's like, I'm 55 for 55. However, a lot of people think that like a lot of these places I'm going aren't worth visiting, or that people are going to hurt me or something like that. And for me, it was just like, wait, traveling and taking photos has the ability to like to change people's minds and to help them see that the world is a great place. And something clicked with me when I did take, specifically on my China trip, like I talked about that. I posted photos from China. I talked about my experience from there. And I had multiple people respond to me on Instagram saying like, whoa, like this is so amazing. I didn't realize China was like this. You make me want to go there. Like it seems like you've met the most awesome people. And that it really clicked with me that, hey, like photo and video is a great way to show people this. So once again, coming back to the storytelling thing, I'm a storytelling geek, but traveling made me realize how important storytelling was and just how like little accurate storytelling we have. So yeah.
Yeah, it. I guess also too traveling probably allows you to see the good in people as well. Because I can relate to you. I saw like one of your Instagram story posts, and I'm gonna quote you here. You the first words that you said on it: "The world is a good place, full of good people."
Mm,
And it's like, especially in today's climate where it's us versus them, or this versus that, and the polarization that's going on right now. It seems like, and I know this from myself too, having traveled quite a bit, like that travel can really open up your mind and broaden your perspective to see that people, for the most part, no matter whether you're from the United States or you're from Colombia or you're from, Romania, we all kind of want the same things, the same basic
right.
human things. It's not really that complicated. It's just that we all have different ways of trying to achieve and attain those things.
Mm-hmm. Truly, it's just there's so much shared experience everywhere that it's blown my mind how much I am similar to a random monk in Myanmar and to a, I don't know, some rich royalty in South Africa. It's like we're all the same, and it's so important I think to tell people that. And yeah, that's always stuck with me.
Are there any places that you've been to in particular that had a a more profound impact on your work, or just even the way that you see the world in general?
Mm. Yeah, two. I would say two immediately come to mind. Both of which are probably the two places I've spent the most amount of time. One would be Kenya, where by now I've spent about a year of my life there. I've lived there for 3 months and for 5 months, and then also just been there plenty of other times. But Kenya changed me a lot because one, it showed me a glimpse into what it is like as a minority. And in Kenya, it was, and not in a bad way, but in Kenya, everywhere you go, people are yelling "Mzungu, Mzungu, Mzungu," which means like, "Hey, white man." And it's just like everywhere you go, it's being pointed out to you that like, "Hey, you look different. You look different. You're not from here." And they don't mean it in a bad way, but it's conscious. It's constantly being reminded to you. And simply that made me just very like aware of, or I like to think that it made me relatively aware of just kind of like of the people around me and always what they're going through. And it's kind of like, how am I making them feel? Am I making other people feel welcomed? Am I pointing out the fact that they don't belong? But Kenya really like stood out to me. And then also Kenya, like they're very, as you can kind of tell, they're aggressively hospitable. They're just, everybody wants to welcome you into their home, say, "Oh, welcome to Kenya. Can you come like have dinner with my family?" And that just kind of taught me the importance of slowing down, of the importance of meeting people, of spending time in community with people, because that is like where so much of the goodness that we have in this world comes from. But Kenya definitely shaped me. And then for specifically from a photo standpoint, India was just one of the biggest game changers for me. India, as I feel like this is pretty on brand for India, but it's just like India is a lot. Like you go there and there's a lot of people, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of different religions, people dress differently, there's social classes, like it's loud, it smells, it's just like there's a whole lot going on, and I was just constantly getting hit with so many things. That India, I think, really made me realize just like how much was out there to document, and just kind of like, oh man, just like the difference in what people believe from a religious standpoint, the difference in what people decide to eat across the world, or the difference in how people decide to dress. And I think just seeing all of that kind of like right next to each other in India made me realize how important it was. And just while on one hand you could say how similar we are, like we were talking about from like a heart standpoint, but there's also so many things about us that make us unique and different. And India was really opened my eyes to that, and just like how different I am from so many people in the world and how beautiful that is. And that just, I mean, talk about lighting a fire under the curiosity. It was like, that was it. Just me realizing the beauty and the differences between all of us.
It sounds like it was overwhelming, but in like a very good way.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. On a bit of a related note here, you got to go to all these interesting places. You mentioned you spent quite a bit of time in Kenya, for example, right? Like several months there it was. And
Mm-hmm.
and you share this content, you post it up on your social media channels and whatnot. But at the same time too, I remember earlier in our conversation about you talking about having these moments to yourself and being embracing those moments. But at the same time, I imagine you know it's important to remind people that maybe follow you on social media or how should I phrase this? I want to rephrase this question. I guess, how important is it for you to kind of, when you meet people who maybe like follow you on social media, or if you've had a chance to people who've seen your life from like the outside, to just kind of remind them that, hey, this is just like a snapshot of my life. Like, yes, I'm doing like really cool things and I'm very grateful for it. I'm very happy that I get to travel and I get to shoot these kinds of places, and these kinds of scenes. But at the same time, it's not like my life is perfect, right? Because I always feel like that's a bit of a challenge when you get into these positions where you're a little bit influential, right? Online, is that people have these perceptions of you that aren't necessarily, they just perceive you to be, perfect, when in reality that's not necessarily the case.
So one of the things that's like, and honestly, like, I'm going to be very upfront and say that I'm not an expert in this, and I don't think I'm like doing the absolute best at it, because the problem is like that you run into, it's that it feels like for so long back in the day that like it was very easy to separate your normal life from your work, and that a lot of times your brand, your business wasn't necessarily based solely on you as a person. But nowadays it's kind of like, especially in like the social media world, things can kind of get blurred to where I do have to ask myself sometimes, where I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't want everybody that's out there to think that I'm perfect, that I have this perfect life. But also from like a business standpoint, I think of it a lot of times as if I'm like the CEO of Coca-Cola. And I'm like, okay, hey, if my Instagram page is like a Coca-Cola billboard, the CEO is not going to post like, oh, I'm having a bad day on like a Coke billboard, because that's not like necessarily great for business. So it's this tough line of like, you want to build a successful business, but also like remind people that you aren't perfect. And for me, I think the number one way to do that, at least for me, has been to try and showcase as much of my personality as much as possible and let people feel like they're really getting to know me. Um, and a lot of times the biggest thing doesn't necessarily come from me being on social media. It's more like when I do meet that person in person, it's like, am I trying to keep up some persona that to match what they think my social media is, or am I going to be very real with this person and like and show them who I am? And I think that's like the number one thing for me, is just like being willing to be vulnerable face to face with somebody and be open with that my life isn't perfect and stuff like that. But I will say, like, the one thing about me is that as active as I am on social media, I don't want to be super active on social media. So it's more like, okay, hey, I could post 10 times a week, and 5 of those could be, hey, my life is perfect, and 5 could be, hey, this is what my life also really looks like. Or I could only post 5 times, and yeah, probably post those good stuff, but then just not be posting the rest of the time. And that's just like, for me, what I have to do for me not to be on social media all the time, and for my mental health. And as far as like the people comparing and thinking about my life being perfect, that comes way more in when I actually get to meet somebody. Because at the end of the day, I can't control how people are going to judge me based off my social media. It's all where I feel like I really get a chance when I actually get to meet them.
Makes sense, man. I want to jump into some more like tactical topics now with you, as far as just the nuances of shooting, in particular video, and then also photography as well. What are like the biggest differences between, going back and forth between the two for yourself?
Between photo and video,
Mm-hmm.
um, for video, the biggest difference, and this is honestly why like I'm so thankful for Video Husky, and I'm sure we'll probably get into that, but I got into this creative thing to create, to be around people, to interact with people, to tell stories. Like, that's my bread and butter. Um, I'm not so great at the being behind the computer thing and editing for 10 hours. Like, it's just, I get drained really easily. So the biggest difference is just like, oh, I want to put out a lot of photo content. Okay, yeah, it's about a 1-to-1 ratio. 1 hour of shooting was 1 hour of editing. But when it comes to video, it's just like, this is great, but the storytelling really comes through in the editing with video. And it's just like, you may shoot for an hour, but then it takes you 10 hours to edit. Um, and that's like the biggest thing with switching over, is just realizing how much time this is going to take to edit, and like really thinking through how you're going to piece each shot together in one cohesive story. Where in photo, I think like one photo can stand on its own, whereas one video clip can't. So you have to be way more cohesive, I think, with video than you do with photo. Um, but yeah.
Gotcha. Walk me through how you plan a video shoot. What does that entail? I'm kind of just curious about like how that goes from like ideation to like finish.
Yeah. So part of this comes from my experience working with a specific company, Lululemon. They're an athletic brand that I've shot a lot athletic wear brand that I've shot a lot for, but they're all about like capturing people in their natural environment. And so I've done a lot of shoots with them, from a photo and video standpoint, but it's all about bringing out that person's most authentic self. And so how I go into it with video is, I kind of will ask somebody like, okay, hey, like, we're documenting, let's say I'm doing a shoot of a runner. I'm doing that this Sunday actually, but I'm doing a shoot of a runner, telling the story of why he runs, why he gets up early in the morning to run 13 miles, and what that looks like. Um, and for me, it's sitting down. The ideation starts with me sitting down beforehand and genuinely asking them, like, hey, treat me like I know absolutely nothing, and tell me the story of why you run and what that looks like every day. And so then it's like, I learn the story. Woo. first I learn the story, and then secondly, I try to just like tell them, hey, I want to set up an authentic like experience like that. I personally don't like shoots that are very like, okay, hey, let's pose for this one clip and then let's stop. It's more like, hey, let's set up an entire scene that you can run through and you can get comfortable with and start to forget the camera is there, which is the key for me. And then once they forget the camera's there, it's like then you're getting to capture the actual moments. But it starts with learning the story of what you're trying to shoot and just like actually sitting down and asking yourself what that looks like from start to finish, and like what that entire journey looks like. Maybe not even from an exact detail standpoint, but just understanding the main points of the journey that you're trying to go on. And I think once I have like those main points, then the little clips, the little in between moments, those fill in along the way. But it's mainly making sure that you're capturing the most important like storytelling pillars, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense to me in terms of just kind of trying to create or set a scene and make it as natural and as normal as possible, rather than trying to, force something upon somebody that doesn't feel natural whatsoever.
Yep.
I want to touch on some business points with you as well. Obviously, you do a lot of commercial work with brands, like as you mentioned, Lululemon. I've seen you done some other work with Airbnb and whatnot. At the same time, you're dialed into this content creator scene as well, and it's interesting to me that you have this experience working with brands from that commercial standpoint. So I'm kind of curious, what advice would you give to creators who are working with or pursuing work with brands to deliver value and just overall like an experience that those brands can actually appreciate?
So first off, I want to preface this with expect to get a lot of rejection. Like that is like with what how I started my commercial work was I would send out emails to every single company that I could find on a given day, like on my computer. And 95% or 90% of them wouldn't respond. 9% of them would say no. And then maybe 1% would say yes. But like that's all that I needed. So just for anybody that's trying to get into the commercial world, as far as like trying to get new work, like realize that, hey, a lot of people are going to say no, but you got to keep putting yourself out there, being willing to fail, being willing to ask. And eventually somebody will say yes. You just kind of got to go from there. But a big thing that I have noticed and is just kind of, it's the importance of, once again, just like treating people like people. And I don't care if you are a hamburger flipper at like a local fast food restaurant or you're the CEO of Amazon, you're a human. And for me, I've seen so many people go into these bigger commercial suits and try to act overly serious, try to be something that they're not, try to act overly professional, and it results in you losing that connection. And so for me on commercial shoots, it's like I try to not remind myself of how important the shoot is and how big of a gig it is. I try to just be like, hey, I'm here with some normal people and they're going to be okay if I ask questions, if I mess something up, and just kind of like going with the flow like that. But along those same lines of not trying to fake it, I would say on commercial shoots, be willing to fail, expect to fail, and accept when you fail. In that, if you're on a shoot and you mess something up, say it and redo it right there. Don't act like everything is okay and try to fix it later, because odds are you won't be able to and it'll be too late. But be willing to say, hey, I'm a human, I made a mistake. Can we redo that shot? I know we've already tried 7 times. Can we go for it again? But it's just kind of like being persistent and expecting that failure, and also treating people like humans, I would say are the two big things. And then thirdly, I would say is simply coming prepared. I mean, I know I sound like somebody who's off the walls all over stuff like that, but the more you can come into something prepared, the more free and off the walls you can be once you show up. because then you already know what to expect and then you can kind of freelance from there. But do your research, make a mood board, create a shot list, so that then you can show up and just play around. But you got to do your work beforehand.
Yeah, it's a lot like, being over prepared is better better than being under prepared, right?
Oh,
Like
100%. Yeah.
you can like, even me, I have like a bunch of questions that I want to ask you, but I know that I'm not necessarily going to get to all of them. But I'd rather have that buffer than not
Absolutely.
have it at all. So
Yep.
on a bit of a related note, I'm kind of curious. You've freelanced for a long time. As a freelancer, you have to operate as a solo business entity. How do you stay organized when it comes to like paying your taxes and all those things that are related to like the business of being a photographer and videographer?
So many of my photographer friends hate me for this. But the short answer is, for me, I don't. And let me get to that. Is I have a buddy who, he was a professional soccer player, but had like a master's in business from school, had a high degree. And he reached out to me about a year into my very unorganized solo photography business. Had never even thought about paying taxes, anything like that. Um, and he came in and was like, "Hey, I want to help you with this stuff." And he started just helping me for free for the first couple months, like getting me set up as an official business, helping me pay my taxes, learn how much I owed, getting myself a business credit card, creating a budget, like all the things. And he helped me with me for a couple months, and something crazy happened. Something crazy happened in that we did it for the first 3 months, and then I was like, "Hey, I want to make this full time. Let's do this for a full year." And in that first year of working together, I doubled how much money I made. And it was because I was doing solely what I loved. And because the things that I hated doing ended up taking more of my time because I didn't want to do them. So I would drag out the process. Whereas when my emphasis was solely on creating, then that freed up so much of time. So we realized, like, hey, like this works really well. Let's create an entire business. And we created a business out of that called BizBud. So essentially, BizBud works kind of similar to Video Husky, solely from a, you pay us monthly. But we have like monthly clients that can hit us up for anything, and we do whatever it is that they hate with their business. It's personalized business help. Because I don't think that every videographer out there, every creator out there should have to spend all this time worrying about their business stuff. I think that they can run a successful business and have somebody else do that for them, in a way that ends up being more cost efficient, because then you make more money with that extra free time. Plus, you're just happier because you're doing things you enjoy. But for me, honestly, I don't have the answers with that because I have a biz bud and that's all I need. But I've put so many other photography friends on and so many other small business owners that everybody I show, they love the idea and they get one themselves. So I'd recommend it to anybody out there who's listening. But yeah, that's how I do it.
The answer to me though sounds like outsource the stuff that you're not expert at, right? Like just get
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Like, don't fake it, realize what you suck at, and let somebody else do it. Like, do what you're best at and stick to that.
How like when he approached you initially for this, like was he asking you a lot of questions? What kind of questions were you asking him to kind of maybe assess his expertise in this area?
So he, I would say he asked me a lot of questions for the first day, but then stopped because he realized I knew very few answers. So he just kind of did his own thing. And I would say for me, I was lucky in that he was also one of my three best friends in the entire world. So I already did have that trust factor with him. I did trust him. But it was, as far as like me, like understanding his expertise, once again, it kind of comes back to the being willing to fail thing. And like, I didn't try to be overbearing with him the first 3 months. I was like, "Hey, you're good at this. I'm going to let you do your thing. And then after 3 months, we'll see if I made more money or not. We'll see if I saved money." Like, black and white, simple as that. And it was really me being willing to be hands off, being willing to trust him, being willing to trust that he might fail and that being okay. But yeah, just always like taking a risk. At least for me, I'm big on taking a risk on something that could potentially lead to you having a bigger, better, smarter, more efficient business. why not?
Totally, man. I feel you on that. Just let go of the things that you don't enjoy that much, and turn it over to somebody who is much better than you at them.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
always the better route to take rather than just trying to spend hours trying to learn it or do it yourself.
Yep.
I'm totally with you on that. The last thing, Jake, I want to touch on with you before we wrap this up is another project that you're working on, J Creative House. You've
Yeah.
got creators ready to go in 15 plus countries around the world in the United States to work with brands, work with businesses who need content created. First of all, how did you build this network of talented creators? Was it just solely through word of mouth and just connecting with people, just being part of that photographer, videographer community, and then just pitching this idea and saying, "Hey, we're stronger together than we are apart."
Yep. So honestly, it came from my solo travels. I mean, once again, I've been to 50 plus countries, and everyone I go to, I try to DM a few different local photographers and say, hey, do any of you guys want to go out and shoot while I'm there? And it's led to me building some great relationships, both in a work way, but also in a friendship way, with so many people from around the country. So it started with just me traveling and getting to know people and having that in my back pocket. And then it kind of grew into, I think I'd just been doing it for a few years and the solo photo video thing by myself. And then I started to find a good creative community here in Nashville that I would work with on bigger projects. And I just started to notice that, hey, every time I'm on a project and I can work with a team and work with other people, one, it's way more fun. Two, the product comes out way better. And so I was like, but yet so many creatives out there work alone. They don't get to work with a team. And I just believe that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. That's like the motto that I like to live by. But I was like, you know what? Why not create this company that helps creatives take on projects together, that we can get a gig and then we send 2 to 3 photo video members out on that shoot, and then they create together, and that allows you to create the best piece possible. And then secondly, it was just simply the fact of me realizing, hey, a lot of creatives out there are so talented but just aren't great at the business side of things, and that's okay. But it's just like they weren't great at learning how to get gigs. So we kind of stepped in and we're like, hey, my buddy in India, hey, my buddy in South Africa, hey, my buddy in England, like, y'all want to, like, are y'all just simply down to like receive gigs from me, like whenever I send them out? And they were like, yeah. So like I take a cut for the business to help run the business, but then from their end, it's so simple. Like they just get an email saying, hey, like you've been sent a gig, and they're able to go out and not have to worry about getting the clients, the invoicing. It's all just simple. All they have to worry about is creating. And then lastly, from a business standpoint, it's just like so many businesses take so much time trying to find creatives when instead they could hit us up, and literally the next day we could have shoots going in Hong Kong, in England, South Africa, wherever for their company. And like that's just, you can't really find that anywhere. So we kind of wanted to start that to provide companies with easy access to creators out there, and also provide creatives with a community and with a business to help fund their business and give them gigs.
Awesome, man. I like that. What was it? If you want to go
You
fast,
want to
go
go,
alone. If you want to
you want to go
go, if
far,
you want to go far, go
go
together.
together.
That's a
Yep.
great, that's an awesome. I'm gonna actually add that to my quote list. I have like a list of quotes on my
That's
iPhone.
not my quote. I stole that from somebody else, but that is a good quote.
It is a great quote, and it seems like it kind of takes things full circle to like where we started this conversation about, you know, learning from your dad, the initial start of your creativity about observing people and then going into traveling and whatnot. I mean, dude, this was a cool conversation. I really enjoyed having you on and chatting with you. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like to close on before we wrap up?
Not really. I mean, specifically for the for the Video Husky people out there, Video Husky has been a huge lifesaver to me. I mean, it's been the greatest thing ever. Like, it's saved so much of my time, and very thankful that I've gotten connected with them, and gotten to, like, I don't know, have more free time, put out more content. It's been great. But no, man, I've had a great conversation. This has been a blast. I'm down whenever. So yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, man, dude, there's probably there is a part 2 potentially with this, because there were other things that I wanted to ask you about as well that we didn't get to touch on. Like I saw you had shot Kanye's Sunday service earlier
Oh
this
yeah,
year, man,
yeah,
which is,
yeah.
I wonder. I listened to Kanye on Rogan like this past weekend.
Oh,
So,
nice. That's awesome.
he's definitely a very interesting guy,
Yeah,
creative guy. So, but would love to touch base with you on that and some other experiences as well another time, man. So appreciate it,
absolutely.
man. This was awesome. This was great.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was awesome. Let me know when you're ready for part 2 and I'll be ready.
Thanks again to Jake Matthews for joining me on the Videocraft Show today, presented by Video Husky. If you want to learn more about Jake or just connect with him, we've got links to all of his platforms that he's active on, as well as his website in the show notes of the podcast, as well as a YouTube description. And if you enjoyed the show, please be sure to leave us a review wherever you tune into podcasts. It really helps us out. We love hearing from you. And also, if you want to stay up to date with new releases on the podcast and other content we're creating here, make sure to sign up to our email list. We've got a link in the show notes as well as a YouTube description down below. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.